Hello and welcome to the SuperShow podcast. I am your host today, Alex Jones, and I am joined, as always, by the ever-wonderful Jamie. How the hell are you doing, my good sir?
Oh, I'm doing wonderfully. It's a joy to be here. Thank you for having me. Delighted to be able to just talk about games. Something I rarely get the opportunity to do. Sometimes I dream, Jonesy, of a day where I might have a platform once a week to just sit down with someone else and chat about the video games industry, but for now, this will have to do.
I am so glad that you said that because, of course, we are, in fact, your one-stop shop, your weekly dose of video game news, even on weeks like this week where there's not actually that much going on. But we have scoured the internet. We have squeezed Reddit for all that it is worth, and we've plucked for some juicy, some not so juicy stories that we're going to hit you up with this week in the world of video games. I'm trying to give it more pizzazz.
No, I like that you left it ambiguous as well, like some interesting, some not so interesting, but you haven't outlined which one's which. So people might need to wait right to the end of the podcast to get to the best fucking one. They don't know. Is it like, are we going to be sat here for 2 hours and is the best bit of podcasting actually going to be that last 5 minutes? You're going to have to sit here at 1 time speed to find out.
None of that 2 times speed bollocks. Come on, stick with us. 1 time speed through.
Sit through the agony in real time.
Exactly. We are, of course, on all podcasting platforms that you can imagine. I'm talking iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. I'm guessing not Stitcher, as apparently they're going bust.
See it, really?
I'm pretty sure I saw something that Stitcher's closing down. I think it's from like August or something, unfortunately. But we're also available on YouTube and Twitter. You can reach us at SuperShow Pod if you would like to on any of those platforms. Send us a cheeky DM. And if one of us remembers to check our Twitter, we will get back to you. Easiest place to talk to us is, of course, on YouTube. This video will be going out Monday, but we are not live. We're doing that cheeky thing they used to do when I was a kid, when they pre-record something and they pretend it's live. So this is a premiere that you can enjoy.
For anyone that's... that's part of the reason. The other reason is, I don't know if anyone caught this peek behind the curtain, but Jonesy actually said a racial slur in last week's live broadcast. We had to, reel it all back in. We had to completely rework it, use some visual effects magic to hide it. And so now everything we have to do has to be pre-recorded and vetted by a team of specialists. And, well, it's a cross we have to bear now.
In my defense, I didn't even know they were classified as a race. So
they're up and coming. There are many of them out there, but they're a growing breed. No one knows who or what I'm talking about.
No, I know, it's brilliant. And I'd see now I'm gonna have to say it's not true because we sold that so well that now people are gonna think that that's actually real. I shouldn't have said that because then people would have gone back to last week to hear what we'd actually said. But there was nothing. No, he's very funny like that.
And Jonesy's smart enough to keep all his racial slurs off the broadcast.
Exactly. You can also listen to us on paisleyradio.com Thursdays at 10 p.m, repeated Mondays at 10 p.m. So there is no excuse to miss a weekly dose of the Super Show podcast. I was thinking about this last week. I want a hoodie with hot takes on the front, trash opinions on the back. I was actually thinking about it. But I don't want a logo because it would, like SS, that's what someone's going to want to do. They'll have to go full Super Show.
That's the problem. Yeah, that's the problem we've always had is that, trust us, Chris tried a number of different ways to try and, rework different fonts and try and get the SS to look like anything but an SS, but it just didn't work. Some kind of slogan. Maybe you could have the hot takes at kind of the top, like front and center, but then the trash opinions is actually at the bottom of the like a tramp stamp. So it's like the hot takes are coming out of our mouth and the trash opinions are coming out of our arse. They're both bad. But we're just spewing it from both ends.
That's great. So, talking about the SS thing, I popped into...
That's not a segue anyone wants to hear.
No, but it is... I'll just briefly shout out to Aim Nestus, who I hopped on one of his live streams that he did. He was playing the Aliens tactical top-down game.
Okay, yeah. The one that came out recently. I can't remember. It didn't get as much buzz as I thought it was going to do, in spite of the fact that the reviews were actually okay.
I really want to play it because just for the soundscape, with sounds fun. I love the Alien soundscape; it's brilliant. Like those plasma rifles sound epic.
Yeah, it was the same with Fireteam Elite. It's the new one's called Dark Descent, but it was the same with Fireteam Elite, where those gun sounds, especially after Aliens, so iconic. It was kind of like, do you remember when Star Wars Battlefront came back in 2015, and you were just like, oh, they've got access to that full sound library and they are rinsing it for every penny.
And you should, because stuff like that's fantastic. Like that's what brings people back, like that sort of love of everything to do with a franchise. But no, so he was playing that, and I sort of commented and said, like, great to see you streaming. He replied and said, oh, nice to have one of the SS boys stop by. I thought, no.
Oh, Jesus.
Boys, not SS boys. Anyway, enough talk about Nazis. Yes. Let's.
Well, I don't know. One of the two people in the story.
Oh. In this story, okay. I'm wondering who you're talking about now. There's two people in this next story that I'm going to talk about. And I don't think either of them are.
I heard that Nazis did like shiny shoes. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, well, okay. I disavow and separate myself from Jamie's comments because we're about to talk about the awesomeness that is Nick Cage, and I happen to reference the fact that he was at Summer Game Fest with Jeff Keighley, and Nick Cage was sort of reminding us that he was going to be making an appearance in the DLC for Dead by Daylight in all of his Nick Cage glory. And so we've actually now finally managed to experience a small slice of that glorious pie, haven't we, Jamie? Because the public playtest for the DLC went live ahead of the game's release, 25th of July. And so people have at this point got to play some Nick Cage, have got to be Nick Cage and experience the joy of his unbridled acting ability. And as I think maybe a first on the Super Show, we've actually got a clip, some of the sound bites from Nicolas Cage that you've listened to already because due to our setup, and I've heard them too. So I'm going to play a few of them for the audience right now so they can get a little treat and a taste of Nick Cage. Here we go.
Stop! I'm Nick fucking Cage!
I'm going to pause it there because it was the one where he just goes, I'm Nick fucking Cage.
Yeah. Basically, he should trademark that at this point.
So I recently watched is it The Overwhelming Weight of Unbearable Talent? Is that what it's called?
It's like, I think it's a combination of words that, if not identical to that, is at least similar to that. Yeah.
With
The Unbearable Weight?
Unbearable Weight, right. With Pedro Pascal also starred. I really liked it. I thought it was a lot of fun. This is that Nick Cage is beautiful. It's like that level of over the top. I'm Nick fucking Cage. It was
really.
It's pretty glorious. I'm going to give the audience another little snippet, Jamie, because I only gave them 8 seconds. I feel like they need another 10 seconds, and then we can
do it.
I'm not afraid. You can't kill me. I will live forever. I'm completely and totally and utterly cow-tit fucked. Sadako, not you. Sadako, wait a minute, I live with Sadako. I mean, it's okay. Get me off the hook! Oh.
All right, I'm going to have to stop it there, otherwise we're going to be here for another minute just of Nick Cage gloriousness. But as you can hear, he's gone the full Nick Cage. He's being truly brilliant. Acting masterclass. So if you're excited about that and you want to hear some more, I guess either go on TikTok and listen to some compilations or YouTube Shorts or something, or maybe just wait for the game to come out on 25th of July.
I know that's just you doing that because that's where you saw it, and so it's you can recommend people go there, and they could at least find something useful. But I don't know if I'm used to the fact that when we watch or listen to something, we recommend people go and find it on TikTok. I'm not used to that world yet. Yeah. But yeah, he nailed it. Like, it reminded me of when Keighley brought him out on stage and he was describing the process a little bit, describing the role a little bit. And one thing I think he points out at the time, and I'm sure he applies the same logic to Massive Talent as well, and I think this is the key of all of this, is that he's not playing himself, or at least he doesn't see it as him playing himself. He sees it as him playing an actor called Nick Cage, who almost encompasses what everyone sees him to actually be. So it doesn't matter whether or not he identifies with the reputation that he's got, or the kind of actor or performer that people see him as. It's almost like he's created this separate character that he can then tap into that is everything that everyone wants him to be. And so all he has to do, because he is still, as we've discussed multiple times, a fine actor at the end of the day, he could just tap into what is now just another character rather than an extended version of himself, or something that's maybe a little bit of the two combined. Although I'm still fascinated. Did you play people for the folks at home, the bit right at the beginning where he's like, bleep, bleep, like he's doing like almost like a malfunctioning road. How do you either script and or direct that if you have Nick Cage in the studio for a couple of hours? Like, how do you get him to that place? That's what I don't know.
I think you just say go, and he says, "What do you mean?" And you go like, "Okay, this is the setup. Just go, and we'll record whatever comes out of your face, and what we like we'll keep in, and what we don't we'll get rid of."
Yeah, I guess so.
There's got to be lines. Like I imagine there's some lines in there. Like there's a few compilations with other stuff, not just what we've played, where they sort of say like he says like you can't kill me, or he says is that give me a torch, or it's references a few things in game. So I guess that they have those hooks, but apart from that, I think you should let him. What do they call it? Let him marinate.
Let him,
and then just come out with it.
Marination feels like more of like a process that you do before you unveil.
That's what I mean. I think that maybe they give him the stuff, let him marinate, and then they just they release him onto the mic, and they're like
throw him onto a hot pan.
Oh, we don't want a hot pan.
And let him sizzle.
Let him sizzle, yeah. Let him sizzle.
Yeah, you're probably right. And if anything, like the idea of that being the workflow is a testament to like how he is still again, we don't know how he was actually like to work with, but through the end results appears to be a pretty consummate professional in the sense that like I know there are other actors out there that I could see that if you hired them and they showed up on the wrong day and you said to them, "Hey, just do your thing," there's a chance you'd end up with dog shit. Like if you did that went through that process with Johnny Depp and he rocked up on a random Wednesday and you gave him a script and said, "Hey, we want you to marinate and then come back and just do your thing," I think there's a 7 out of 10 chance he just completely like phones it in.
Agreed.
But I don't know. I don't know that Nick Cage does phone it in. Well, there's limited evidence that he does.
I think you're right, but I think the difference is like he's done what few actors do, whereby some actors get typecast in a role and they'll be that role. He's now been typecast as Nick Cage, which is it's not a real person, as you said. It's a thing that he's kind of created, and some people want that. Like, I guess Arnie was probably there at one point in his career where that wasn't really him, like the, slow talking, like big, like muscle guy, and he just had this way about him. But Nick Cage seems to have just got that to a fine art. Whereas, like you're right, if it's Johnny Depp, like what is Johnny Depp when you're not directing him? He's a guy who mumbles, doesn't really talk that much.
Right, exactly.
There's not a Johnny Depp kind of persona.
Not like there is like if you hired Brad Pitt and didn't give him any direction, Brad Pitt. We all know what like the neutral Brad Pitt is like because he's still like that in 90% of his roles, apart from films like 12 Monkeys or whatever, where he's been given something very different to do. Brad Pitt is like Ocean's 11. Brad Pitt is just Brad Pitt most of the time, and that's like you get what you're paying for, I guess. In that respect, yeah, absolutely.
Nick Cage it's like if you had Tom Cruise and you got him in a voice booth and you said, "Crank the Tom Cruise up to 11," he just run away. Then he doesn't know.
Yeah, exactly. Cranking when you ask Tom Cruise to crank it up to 11, I think that's the point where he actually incorporates suicide into one of his stunts. Like he just intentionally dies at the end of it.
He just
like, no, this is
off a cliff at full speed.
Yeah. He just becomes, when people have that Superman complex, he's like, no, I can stand in front of a moving train. This is my superpower. Christopher McQuarrie says in the script that I'm standing in front of a train. I'm standing in front of a fucking train. Like, Tom, you're gonna die.
That would be a great bit for like a comedy thing where Tom Cruise is talking to the exec producers about the fact that he's going to do his own stunt, and the stunt is to stand in front of a moving train. And they're like, "Tom, you'll die." And he's like, and he fires the exec producers, does it himself. Then then it cuts to him on the set, and he just gets totaled by a train. And it's like,
yeah,
oh.
That's what SNL's going to do around the release of like, if not this, then the next Mission Impossible. There's going to be some skit somewhere about Tom Cruise's own stunt doing, getting to his own head and being his demise. I want to say there was a joke about that in. Do you remember there when in the mid-noughties, post Scary Movie, there was a bunch of other rip-off spoofs of it. So there was like Epic Movie and Meet the Spartans and
I forgot about that.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff. And one of them was a play on Spider-Man, and it was Drake from Drake and Josh playing, but I can't remember what bug he was, and that's the whole point. I don't think he was green. I think he was called like the Fire. No, the Fire. I can't remember. But all I know is that was around the same time as Tom Cruise did that really weird sort of like piece to camera for the Church of Scientology that leaked, where like the Mission Impossible music is kind of like humming in the background, and he's doing all this weird, I don't know, probably Dianetic stuff. And because obviously those films often riff on sort of pop cultural references as well as the films that they're spoofing. They had Tom Cruise in that film. They had a lookalike, and someone who actually did a pretty decent Tom Cruise impression, kind of like taking the piss out of the superhero and saying the guy thinks he can fly. And by the end of the interview, Tom Cruise is like, I can fly. I can fly. And he's convinced himself that he can. I think there's a gag later on the film where he jumps off a building.
It's just funny. There's you talking about SNL. There's an old SNL clip of a guy being, what's his name? Shit. Who's the Aikido guy?
Steven Seagal?
Yes. It's Steven Seagal who's doing his own stunts, and he keeps killing all of the stuntmen who he's doing the fight scenes with. He keeps breaking their necks. And anyone who disagrees with, he just breaks their necks. And then he says, I'm going to jump off this building and fly. And they're like, we need the wire team in here. And he's like, I don't need wires. I'm going to jump and fly. And like, okay. And it's that kind of thing. Yeah. Which is,
yeah.
I think that's a lot of actors who end up believing their own hype.
I mean, yeah, it happens to cult leaders. Why not actors?
But then that's what's interesting about Nicolas Cage is he's taken that hype Nicolas Cage and he's kind of seems to have made it into its own thing, and he's found a way to sell it. And like, the Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent and the Nicolas Cage in Dead by Daylight, it seems like he's now selling that as something he can actually market and he can sell as a separate thing to himself, which is, fair play.
Smart. As long as he keeps it fresh and doesn't, or as long as either he doesn't overdo it or the industry doesn't overdo it in terms of how many times we go back to the well on that, then more power to him. The film I couldn't remember was just called Superhero Movie, by the way, and he was the Dragonfly in it.
Dragonfly, okay. Well, one bunch of super amazing, awesome people to another bunch of super amazing, awesome people. I am talking about our Patreons who support us over at patreon.com/SuperShow. They are an awesome group of people that keep us coming back, keep the lights turned on. They keep Jamie in cans of Red Bull and Death Row t-shirts.
Death Row Records and Red Bull. That's my brand, apparently.
Say what you see now. I'm like catchphrase. But no, we are ever grateful, and it's genuinely heartwarming that people have stayed with us for such a long time and people still support the show month in and month out. I would like to give a shout out to some people. There are some names on screen right now that support us, but I would also like to give a shout out to some people. I'm talking about Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Brimstone, Cole K, Ice Dog Rock Salt, Jesper Camdo Nielsen, Leo Merger, Mindful Pig, Mr. Anthropic, Pastors Guild, and the big dogs, the members of the board, the ones who tell us what to do, is Brett Z, aka Shellshock, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Greed, Manuel Guerrero, and He's What. I managed to say Peas What without saying it weird.
Good rats. You beat me on that front.
But no, thank you, everyone. Yeah. Thank you, all of our patrons. And also thank you to everyone who watches the show, who comments, who likes. All of that stuff does a lot for discoverability and all those things, and who give us reviews on podcasting platforms as well. Yeah, if you are feeling inclined, if you're listening to this on a podcasting platform, on your phone maybe just, pop it out your pocket, get the 5 stars on the go, and drop a little comment.
Hell yeah. Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you all so much. And if the day ever comes where I do have to downgrade from Red Bull to Blue Bolt or Zap or what, I don't even know what, then maybe that's when we call a day on this bad boy.
We used to get Red Bull back in the day where we used to work in the very, very early days. We'd done a deal with them, apparently.
Oh, even that, it sends shivers down my spine. Sainsbury's, which is a UK-based supermarket chain, used to have one called Blue Bolt. I don't know if they might still do. And I used to drink an ungodly amount of that stuff. And it was the first time I realized what a crash and what a come down could feel like. I was being sort of 15 and drinking 2 liters of that stuff, and then still being awake at 6 a.m. and wondering why I didn't like my life anymore.
Yeah, you don't want to be drinking budget energy.
No, let alone 2 liters off. But there we
go. But Jamie, enough about the what you've been putting in your mouth. What you've been putting in your eyes.
Oh, God. Wow, I had no right up until the very final word was completed. I had no idea where that was going to go. I didn't realize, I thought fucking SuperShow After Dark was about to start broadcasting again. Joe, I haven't been putting an awful lot in my eyes. As you kind of hinted at earlier with our pre-recording this episode, I'm away for a lot of this week, so that meant work-wise I had to get a lot of ducks in a row. Big handover email sent at like 10 o'clock at night on Friday as I kind of finally, crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. Although I probably, given how tired I was dotting T's and crossing I's, which won't do anyone any good come Monday. But that's not my problem anymore. And so that kind of meant that I was just sort of like filling bits and pieces of gaps and downtime with games and doing a lot of gaming from bed. The Steam Deck has been a godsend for that. So continue to play Dave the Diver. Like I've got I've started a fresh save on Hades that I'm working through on that. And also just exploring a couple of other games that like weirdly, I don't know if it's good optimization or just the right circumstances or just those games being slightly older than I thought they were. But there are a bunch of games that just run really well on the Steam Deck for no reason. Okay. One of which is Mad Max. The Mad Max from like 2060. I'm not 2050. Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Open world, sort of Fury Road inspired game from Avalanche. And like that's an example of a game, obviously at a decreased resolution, but still native to the Steam Deck's display. It runs basically at a locked 60 on the very high preset.
Okay.
And so like I'm playing this game on a portable console and realizing that like this looks and runs better than it did when I played it and actually didn't much care for it originally on the PS4. And so I'm actually having a better time. Being a pick up and play helps a lot. Also, I found that the Steam Deck is really quite comfortable from the chair that you're looking at me in right now, if you're watching the YouTube version of it, because my silhouette, Jonesy, my figure, doesn't come in handy for much. But what it does come in handy for is when I'm inclined at or reclined at a certain angle, that it becomes sort of like a platform that I can rest things on, one of which is the Steam Deck. So I kind of have my elbows on the arms of my chair, but the Steam Deck itself on my belly, and everything's really well distributed weight-wise, and I can sit there for hours until the battery dies.
Feel forget.
Yeah, hey, never let it be said that I was built for anything else. The other thing that I was going to flag, just because I think you mentioned it a couple of weeks ago, you might have seen it at the cinema, I can't remember. I'm only mentioning it because I feel like it's the first MCU film I've seen, I think, since... I can't remember whichever one came out more recently from the last Thor and the last Spider-Man. I'm guessing it was Thor, but I lose track. But I saw Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3.
Okay. What did you think?
I thought that it was a bit of a mess. I didn't dislike it. It certainly sort of grew on me as it went on, but I thought it was a bit messy, a bit too long. I thought the first half an hour, like I thought I was going to have to turn it off. It just felt so choppy to me, so rough in terms of the speed at which it was moving, how some of those sequences were. Again, I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it with a more considered eye, because it felt at the time like it was cut in a way that like almost made it like unmanageable for me, especially because I was also trying to do that thing where I was like, right, that's Nebula and she's Gamora's sister, but not this Gamora, but still this Gamora, but not that Gamora. And now she's got an arm that can do this. I don't know where she got that arm from. And Peter Quill's an alcoholic now, and I don't really know why, but I'm guessing it's something to do with that film that I saw in the cinema 4 years ago. And yeah, and you just you do pick that stuff up inevitably, but there's also parts of it where you just like, you kind of have to fill in the gaps. And then all of a sudden it starts throwing in other characters, some of which like I really liked the depiction of Adam Warlock they go with, but they immediately run out of things to do with him, and it's like, what's he even here for? Like, yeah,
they've tried to get that film to do a lot of heavy lifting.
That's the problem.
And
in 2.5 hours, it still feels like they don't do a lot of that heavy lifting.
No, and I'm with you. So when I saw it, like I think I had positive praises on the podcast, but I think my issue with it was when I saw it, I wasn't quite sure if I liked it or not.
Okay.
But then afterwards, I kind of was like, oh no, I do, and I actually think it's a lot better than I thought it was. But dissimilar to you, I just rewatched, I think, both Avengers films, and I'd also rewatched Guardians 1 and 2 quite recently.
Okay.
So I went in there like with all of that stuff just brimming in my brain. I knew exactly where I was at. And so it was, and now the way you frame it, the stuff about Gamora and the stuff about how you're supposed to know what's going on with Nebula, and it is actually, if that stuff wasn't that sort of fresh to you, that film would be, so goddamn confusing. Like, I dread to think some people go to see it who maybe you haven't seen those films at all, and it was just like, hell. Like,
I think you can have a good time, but there was a bit of it where, there were enough elements from Infinity War and Endgame, and even apparently from what I gather, the Christmas special they did, that I was like, this is spoilers for the Christmas special, not for Volume 3, but like, it's established that Concrete established that Mantis and Star-Lord are half siblings.
Yes,
they're both related to Kurt Russell in some way. And I was like, okay, like, so you just had to roll with those punches, and it doesn't affect the overall plot. What I will say is that there were some ideas and some concepts and characters in Volume 3 that I thought were really well done, and some of the more interesting things that, like, a Marvel film I've seen a Marvel film do in a little while. I thought that, like, hinging a lot of the primary arc on Rocket's backstory and that narrative, like, I thought a lot of that stuff was actually really strong, because it's endearing, and also, you know, it's that's a character we've grown to love in his own right, and now we're seeing, and like, now we're another door of that is being opened up to us. I think what's also helped with that is the strength of the primary antagonist of the film, both in terms of not necessarily goals and desires. I think a lot of that stuff is pretty rote, but like certainly performance, like a very engaging screen presence that helped a lot of those flashbacks really kind of sustain my interest.
A feeling that I had about this though was, and this is what bugged me when after seeing it, immediately the first thing that sort of struck me was that is not a final in a trilogy film. To me, that was a in the middle of the pack, like maybe second to last film. But then I was kind of feeling like I don't know how I feel about the fact that I'm never going to see the Guardians of the Galaxy as they were together again.
I disagree. I think when you look at their individual arcs, I think a lot of them, if they hadn't got to the places they needed to get to by the start of Volume 3, I think they got to the places they needed to get to by the end of it. Even if that wasn't the way, like I can't spoil anything, obviously, that I don't think this thing's even out on streaming yet. But like some of those arcs may be less satisfying in terms of resolutions than others. But it reminded me very much of Endgame. Like, if you go back to Endgame, which again I won't spoil the specifics on, even though I think most people have seen it or been aware of by now. Endgame kind of split the pack. Was like, some people are going to get very definitive endings, some people are going to get ambiguously definitive endings, and some people are going to have completely open endings. And I think Guardians was an appropriate mix of that. That I actually thought, like, there's a music montage towards the end, and in my opinion, you can't not watch that and be like, yeah, that's it. These guys have come to the end of their journey as the Guardians of the Galaxy, no matter who or what comes next.
No, like, agreed. You couldn't now have another film with them in it. Like, I think they've obviously very definitively said, no, there's not going to be another one. I don't know. I just felt like I would have maybe wanted them to focus somewhere else as a final. But no, you're not wrong. And it's a film that's grown on me since I've seen it. You know, when you sort of think about it more, and you're kind of like, okay, yeah, no, yeah. And I think that trilogy, the three Guardians films, are probably they're easily my favorite trilogy from like Marvel.
Yeah, I think when you look at sort of the various offshoots of Marvel as some like little self-contained things, I think the Guardians trilogy does stand on very strong ground amongst the rest of the MCU up to this point, in my opinion. I think it's also interesting though that 3 films down, and I've mostly enjoyed all 3 of them. But not only is the first still the strongest after all this time, but it's also just a reminder that video game, and you said this when you saw the film, but that video game was really fucking good.
Yeah.
And like maybe had my favorite story or my second favorite story. Well, the first one gets the benefit of introducing us to the Guardians, right? Yes. And there's a kind of a happy-go-lucky element to that can play things a little bit fast and loose, whereas Volume 2 and 3 got much more caught up in MCU stuff than the first one had to consider. But
Weirdly, you say about the video game. If you've seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, and then you played the game, like, so if you'd only seen like 1 and 2, and then you played the game, you'd be like, okay, yeah, this is a Guardians game, this is fine. I feel like if you go and watch Guardians Volume 3 and having not played the game, which I believe is on Game Pass, and you then played it, you would be like, oh, I recognize so many of these characters. Like, because they have a whole bunch of the characters who are in the game are in this film, which is like, and it almost sounds like a full circle thing of being like, oh yeah, like it can almost be an interloper game story.
Yeah,
I don't know where it would slot in because it sort of does tread on some of the toes of what goes on in the movie scene.
But because you're right. What it's interesting about how like there are some of the things that this film tries to do for Rocket that game does for multiple characters through the game's kind of central crutch, which again, like we're really worth playing if you're kind of curious about what we're talking about. But if what the Guardians as a trilogy was doing the whole time was kind of tugging at the idea of like, hey, these are potentially unlikable kind of anarchistic personalities thrust together to make an unlikely group of anti-heroes, but actually they've all got very soft centers, and we're going to slowly reveal that to you over the course of 3 movies. The video game gets to that core, that gooey core, far quicker and almost far more effectively. But that doesn't mean that I didn't like what they did for certain characters along the way in the movies. There's something very effective about the video game's version of it, especially like the video game. One thing I think I can say is like at a certain point began to focus far more on Drax in a way that the Guardians films have hinted at, but never went all in on in the same way they did with Rocket now. And that stuff was really effective in the game. But
hey, if you like yourself some Guardians, yeah, maybe go check out the game or the film if you haven't seen the film yet. I haven't really played anything outside of Jedi Survivor, so I'm not going to talk about that because I don't want to bore people with more Star Wars. But I would like to mention 2 things that I've watched. I'll try and keep it quick because I don't want to go on too much about Marvel-y kind of stuff. Actually, first I'll touch on Maniac, which I watched, which is the Netflix show, which is a limited run, like 7 or 8 episodes, which I watched recently. And I just wanted to give it a shout out because I really enjoyed it. Was it Seth? What is his name?
Jonah Hill.
Jonah Hill.
I remember this coming out and then being like, oh, I've got to watch that, because it was also, I think it was the first thing that Kerry, or the second thing that Kerry Fukunaga did after True Detective season 1. So it's like, oh shit.
Yeah, no, really liked it. Good series, weird, like a bit psychedelic, a bit strange, a bit bizarre and fun, and but very weird enough and enjoyable enough to get into. And I nailed the entire season in about 2 days. I think each episode is pretty short. I think some are like 25. I think it changed actually how long they are. Some are like 25 minutes, maybe some are just over 30. And there's only about 7 episodes, so you can knock that out in a weekend if you've got time. But I really enjoyed it, so I wanted to give it a shout out. Also, I wanted to give a little bumper before I slag off the absolute shit show that is Black Adam.
Oh wow, okay.
Which I checked out yesterday, so fresh in my mind.
Go on, spill the tea.
I don't know where to start. So, like, we never like to give away spoilers or anything, so I won't touch on like actual story, what happens. But I will just say, we've just talked about Marvel and about Guardians of the Galaxy and Endgame and a few of those films. If you're a Marvel fan and you go in to watch this, you'll be fine, because it is such a rip-off of multiple Marvel characters that are just taken whole cloth, just copied, and have their names changed. And I know that is comic books, DC and Marvel in general, like they have that sort of thing. But like, and so this film revolves around like Black Adam, obviously, who's played by Dwayne Johnson, and then you've got Hawk, which I didn't realize. You've then got Hawkman, Fate, Atom Smasher, and I can't remember her name. Hurricane Girl, I'll call her that.
Okay, sure.
So Hawkman is played, I can't remember the actor's name, but I swear he's doing his best Anthony Mackie voice impression. Like, he sounds exactly like Anthony Mackie, and he's exactly like Falcon. Like, they are the same goddamn character. You've then got Pierce Brosnan, who is, I swear, was probably in about 10 minutes of filming time, and then the rest of it is just like a gold helmet that just goes on a CGI character, and he's not in, and he is Doctor Strange. Same powers. He's even a doctor. Even halfway through, they're like, "Oh, I'm a doctor of blah 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 blah," and you're like, okay, this is a complete rip-off of Doctor Strange. But again,
Yeah, I think the character's name is Dr. Fate, right?
I think it's Doctor something else. I think his name's Dr. Kevin something.
I mean, when his superhero name is Dr. Fate.
Oh, okay. I'm not 100%.
Because I think he was in I think he's in the Injustice games. I think that was the first time I heard about him.
And I'd never heard about him. You then have, and they even play to some of the story beats. Like they talk to him about the fact that he can see millions of type of futures and which one is going to come out of this. And you're like, this is just Endgame. You've then got Atom Smasher, who is just Ant-Man. Like he's just Ant-Man. His power is to grow big. That's the only, he can't grow small. He just grows big. Like when Ant-Man grows big, and he's the same kind of ditzy, lovable fool kind of character that Paul Rudd plays. But they play it so on the nose. It's not even like I don't get it. And then, and all of that aside, right? All of that aside,
yes,
you then have the real problem for me with DC movies, which is that, and I recently watched.
They're bad.
They're really bad. The reason being is that I think I watched a recent Stan Lee documentary on Disney, and he sort of says the genius that was Marvel in the end was that they were trying to make characters that were relatable by real people. So they used real people's stories or things that could happen to real people and gave those issues to superheroes. DC's gone the other way and tries to make superhero problems, and they're so shit. Like, they're not interesting, they're unrelatable, and no one cares. And for me, this film just does that again in spades. Like, you don't have any arcs. There's no sort of like way the characters change. If they need to have like change the way they're going to address a situation, which is normally done by an arc, they just suddenly do something different without any reason of doing it.
Nothing's ever like justified or
no. I'll give you an example. The Justice Society, I believe they're called, rock up and they're like, Black Adam is here, and we need to take him in. He's super powered, and we can't let him run around because he's going to destroy everything. So they rock up, and you're like, okay, well then you need to say to him, hey man, you're too powerful. We can't let you just be running around because you're just going to break shit. All right, just say that. But they go up to him and they go, Black Adam, you're too powerful. So either you can kneel or die. And you're like, what the fuck is this? Why have you gone in? So the whole setup is that you're this Justice Society. You're a bunch of heroes that are going to try and... The first thing you do when you meet this guy is say, you have to kneel to us or we're going to kill you. I'm like, this is such writing. And the rest of the film is literally that same conversation like 15 times. Do what we want, like do this or we're going to kill you. And Dwayne Johnson is a fucking mountain. He's a man mountain. He looks incredible. Yep. He's like said that he's gotten to the best shape ever for Black Adam, and how he's never been a superhero before, I don't really understand. But I also kind of can, because in this film, an actor with some acting chops who can actually sell like some real emotion would have worked really well, especially if the writing had been done. To kind of give him this arc of what he goes through from when we first meet him to when, the end of the film. They just don't bother with any of that. Like, don't do with it. He's tough and he's going to punch stuff. The whole film is just like punch stuff, punch stuff, punch stuff, punch stuff. Suddenly someone goes, oh my God, I shouldn't punch stuff. That's how the film goes, and it's terrible.
Yeah, the thing is, I don't mind films that kind of follow that path if I'm having fun with them along the way. But yeah, it doesn't sound like there's much redeemable even in the fun department about Black Adam.
But it is, weirdly though, it's still enjoyable for its spectacle. Like if you like superhero movies for spectacle, absolutely. Like it was quite funny. I said to my wife as we finished watching it, I said, "Did you like that?" And she said, "Yeah, it was fucking terrible."
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer.
And I laughed.
I wanted it. Did you get the same reaction? Because I thought the same when you saw the trailer if you saw the trailer for The Flash recently, where you're like, this looks like hot nonsense, but I think I'd have a good time with it.
So I thought that I heard that The Flash was good, and I was like, oh, I'm actually looking forward to The Flash. And now that it's come out and everyone says it's awful, I'm like, oh, okay, this is the same as Black Adam. It's going to be some really good cinematics, some utter garbage writing, nonsensical plot, and it's going to be a hell of a show.
Yeah, they will have spent money on it. That's for sure.
And if you like the Rock is cool, man. He's hench, and they've got some great CGI. I mean, and if you want to see some superhero, I tell you what. So, if you remember those films that used to come out that were like, you'd get a proper film So something like, Jesus, I don't even know. You'd get a film come out. There's a proper film made by a big studio.
Schindler's List.
Sure. And then a small time like budget DVD would come out that would be called like Bindler's Tryst. And it would be and it would be like a bad B movie.
Bindler's Tryst sounds like I quite like that.
And it would be like a bad B movie that was just hoping that people would misread the DVD box and buy it because it had some of the same themes. This feels like it should have been called like I don't even know. It should have been called Garvel's something like Avengers. It's something like with Avengers in it. That people would go, is this?
Oh, not like
is this
not
old?
like Smack Fallon. Smack. I don't know.
Maybe anything. It just feels like it should have had a name which was a pun of a
Adam's Tryst.
And then you'd go, oh, is this that Marvel movie? And then it's on sale, $5.99. My kid wants to see that. I'll buy it. And then
I think they stopped doing that.
You done?
I think they stopped doing that when porn parodies became a thing. And then all of a sudden it's like, hang on a second, am I accidentally buying a
porn?
Triple X, right? But speaking of which, Bindler's Tryst, that is definitely a porn parody right there.
Bindler's Tryst.
Yeah. Bindler's Tryst XXX. I'll be honest with you, yeah, I was nowhere near, coming to terms with the idea of watching Black Adam. And if anything, I'm now further away. So thank you for that. Especially also now knowing that that it's not that any of this is for anything or needs to be for anything for a movie to be good, but knowing that Black Adam is as a character is essentially done now, Dwayne Johnson's done, and that the DCEU is just completely moving on with James Gunn, and
yeah,
it's just kind of like why invest at this stage? And I know that's a stupid way of looking at movies because they can be enjoyed in their own right, as I said. But yeah, it's a distraction.
I would thought was bizarre was they even start the film off with, I can't remember the actress's name. She's the one who puts together the Suicide Squad.
She's Viola Davis, she's Amanda Waller.
Right, so she's supposed to be, I guess she's like the Nick Fury of the DC universe, where she's the architect of the Avengers. He's the architect of the Avengers. She's the architect of these DC teams.
So she was one of the only characters and actors who was in both versions of the Suicide Squad.
Right. So so she even had, and she's got the same role. This starts off. I thought this was weird. I wasn't anticipating this. It even right at the beginning is we need to put together a team, and I was kind of like, oh, this is not what I thought. I thought this was about a guy called Black Adam who is going to save the day, and it's going to be like a single superhero movie. But it's not at all. It's we're going to build a team. I was like, oh, are we now going to get a montage of this team being built? You're like, oh no, they just arrive and they're a team. So did you ever see The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen? It kind of has that feel where they go, we're putting together
the Sean Connery one.
Yes, where they just go smash together a team of mystical creatures and random people, and you go, you'll enjoy this. You'll enjoy this. It's a team, and you're like, what have you done? You've just made the strangest film ever. But this is not because it's people who like these characters from DC can still get something out of this. But yeah, but a bit weird, a bit strange, but spectacle, a bit of spectacle.
Sure. You just reminded me as well of the fact that, because obviously some of them were involved in that League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, how Universal tried to make their monsters the universe, where the only thing that came out, it depends. There was that Dracula film, but I think they tried to pretend that wasn't the start. And then Tom Cruise was in The Mummy, but he wasn't the Mummy. He was someone else. And then Javier Bardem was going to be Frankenstein. Johnny Depp was going to be the Invisible Man. Russell Crowe was Jekyll and Hyde. They had it all figured out, and then they made that Tom Cruise Mummy film, and it flopped so hard they were like, we probably shouldn't do this.
Right? Yeah, this is that. To be fair to them, so Hawkman, actually, I really like. I thought he was cool. He's I've heard of him before, so I'm like, okay, that's fine. It's like a weird Falcon ripoff, or maybe Falcon's a ripoff of Hawkman. The costume's cool, but I'm like, but you've never shown me a film of this guy in. I'm just supposed to accept him as the leader of the Justice Society, and you're going to throw in some other rip-off Marvel characters. Anyway, I'm going to stop talking about it because people are probably why are you talking about this? I think it got 44 out of 100 on Metacritic. I apologise for talking about it so long, but I've been wanting to rag on it all week. Well,
good news, Jonesy, is that a couple of people like Greg Fraser, the DOP and stuff like that, have been out there hyping up some of their ideas for the second Batman film, so that's going to come along and save us, or be the savior of comic book movies, CBMs.
It's funny as well because like I said, I recently watched some of the other Marvel films, and I actually had a lot more appreciation for the nuance of the story in some of those things, like Tony Stark just having a moment with his dad in the past, and it was like, oh, kids aren't that bad, and you'll be a fine dad, and all of this, and it was quite like it didn't need to be there, and it's a bit like mushy, but a bit heartfelt, and we know what happens in the end and stuff. So, but then this is the opposite. This is complete mindless. Like we're just going to keep punching each other until the film ends. Also, I mean, fucking terrible.
Word for Rocky.
Terrible bad guy. Like one of the worst kind of.
Oh
shit.
See, from your description, I didn't even know there was a bad guy. I thought the conflict was Black Adam against the group, the Justice Society.
I don't want to ruin it, Jamie, so I'm not going to tell you anymore. But there is a token, pointless bad guy who is really shit. So,
no,
just imagine the crappiest kind of phone-it-in bad guy you could come up with, and you're probably pretty close. But don't try now because it.
Is their name Bindler?
Their name should be Bindler. He is that generic.
Okay.
But talking about one bad guy and moving on to another, because a bad guy, I'm going to absolutely butcher this name, by the name of Yanni Ouahioune. No, that's going to be clearly right. Ouahioune. What's French? I don't know how to do French.
Well, I think the first syllable would be more like have like an oo sound if that's French, right?
Ouahioune.
It's like a Moroccan name almost, or an Algerian name. I don't know.
Oh god, I've got no idea. Anyway, so this is the story of
Ouahioune.
Let's just call him Yanni. Easy.
Yanni.
So this is the story about Yanni, who is a 22-year-old French gamer who got in a bit of trouble back in 2020 because he was guilty of swatting a number of different people. The main one, the biggest one that he swatted was Ubisoft Montreal. And he actually called in he said that there was a hostage situation. And so the police arrived. They evacuated the entire building. We're talking the entire company. People might have heard about it at the time. And this was all bollocks. They went in, they investigated. They found that there was nothing going on. And it's probably the biggest swatting incident. I'm gonna maybe guess.
In terms of like gaming swatting incidents that kind of got big publicity, this was one of the more notable ones. Because I remember being on Twitter while this was happening, and there being people like, "Hope everyone at Ubisoft is okay," kind of thing. No one knew what was going on for a while. It's a big deal.
Absolutely, but he didn't just swat them once; he swatted them a couple of times. Not to mention, he also carried out DDoS attacks on Mojang for who knows the slight that he'd done to them, as well as some French government sites. But the reason he's in the news this week is because he has now been sentenced to 3.5 years of community service, James. But the reason I wanted to talk about this was purely because when you get into the meat of like why this happened, and his reaction was actually pretty funny. Now that we know that no one like died, fortunately, because obviously if you swat people and something goes wrong, it has happened before that people could actually end up getting murdered. So it's pretty good. That no one did in this incident. But he is a Rainbow Six Siege player, Jamie, okay? He loves a bit of Siege. Problem is, he doesn't like being good at Siege. He likes cheating and getting good at Siege. He also likes hacking streamers, which is two things that if you do, could get you banned.
Yeah, most terms of service pretty strongly strong guidances against acts like those.
Indeed, and so Yanni actually racked up 80 bans against from his Ubisoft account, which is what eventually drove him to decide that he was going to take it out on Ubisoft Montreal, and he was going to swat them in glorious fashion by getting, I can't remember how many cars it was, 4 or 5 armed police vehicles to go out there. But he was particularly pissed off, so he decided that that's what he was going to do. Do you know, Jamie, what he thought the outcome of this would be? After all of this, he spoke to a newspaper, a Canadian newspaper called La Presse.
Yeah, that does sound French-Canadian.
He said to them, "Can you say that I am kindly asking the Ubisoft team to unban my account, please, because I've spent over $1,500 on cosmetic enhancements for my profile," which was my favourite part of this entire story.
Oh, it's the best part of an otherwise bad story. And in that sense, calling it the best part isn't much of a glowing endorsement either. Like, because overall this story is, I think, largely just depressing for me.
It is. I tried to make it a little bit playful and a bit.
No, you're right too. You're right too, because we're podcasting, and people are going living their lives. Someone are listening to this on their way to work, and they don't need to be reminded how shitty place the world can be, or how there are people out there who think to themselves, "I cheated in a video game and my account got banned, so I'm going to pretend that there's a hostage situation in the development studio wherein the game was made." Of course, we can't be surprised that people's brains work that way. But we can still be disappointed that they do. But the thing that's more disappointing for all of that, beyond all of that, is the outcome of this case. Because while I agree with you, you made a good point that like nothing bad happened. You know, of all the things that can go wrong during a swatting, nothing did, and that's a blessing in this case. But yeah, for me, the focus shouldn't be on the fact that nothing did go wrong. It should be on the fact that something can go wrong. And when you're talking about, you know, the fact that there are swattings that have gone wrong, when you're talking about this, you know, there being situations where, you know, things have gotten out of hand or been misinterpreted or miscommunicated, and people have died during swattings, then there needs to be greater deterrence out there for what in this case is multiple swattings, and as you noted, one of the most significant and publicly acknowledged swattings in recent history, and there's not even jail time involved. I mean, are we really saying like, you know, don't do this, but you're not actually going to get in real trouble until someone dies? Is that what we're saying?
Can I try and sway you a little bit? Because I was kind
by all means,
I was kind of of a similar opinion. But so he's been sentenced to, like I said, 3.5 years of community service, which is a hell of a lot of community service. He's also been sentenced to make reparations to the people that he swatted. So I don't know if that's like financial or whatever. He's also been also has to attend psychiatric like appointments and things, which makes absolute sense. And I think when you put together that fact and the fact that actually 3.5 years community service is a lot of public work that he's going to
3.5 years community service is a lot of community service, but it's just that.
Absolutely.
Like eating 3.5 tons of pizza is a lot of pizza.
No, sure, but what I was going to say was he was also under the age of 20 and under when he committed these acts.
Okay.
And I would top it off by saying the quote about, "Can you ask Ubisoft to unban my account?" to the newspaper, just for me, just galvanizes the fact that this is a completely out of touch, like young guy who I think the judge may have gone very lenient on, in order to be like, this is a guy who needs to touch grass in the most like explicit form. He needs to spend 3.5 years.
Hey, so there are some prisons that have grass.
That's true. That's true.
No, you're right, and I do concede that last bit does make some amount of sense, and I can see that. Like, you're absolutely right. When you look at this, when you look at that quote that you pointed out about the cosmetic purchases that Yanni's made in a more clinical sense, you're like, okay, this is someone who doesn't even understand the consequences of what they've done, which is usually a pretty good indicator that maybe you need to seek other means of sort of like rehabilitating them or whatever it is you hope to achieve. It's just my concern that one thing that seems to be the case about swatting is like, if something goes from a thing you haven't heard of, like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, to a thing that you're not surprised by in that time, that suggests that people hearing about swatting and finding out what swatting is will, in some cases, register in the minds of people as something that they can then do in the future. People are being like,
yeah, that's no.
Do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Like, Yanni swatted a game studio because he had heard a story about someone else swatting someone else within the games industry scene. If not a developer or a studio, then maybe another gamer. Which the article we looked at said he had done as well. Like, that's the other thing. Yanni had swatted rival gamers in the past. I think when someone's relationship with an act like that is so nonchalant, even in the case where there may be other reasons to believe that they're not all the way there, and there's, like as you said, some significant grass touching that needed to be done, I still wish that the deterrent, that this case created for future potential swatters was greater than the headline of 3.5 years community service.
I think you're probably right. There should have been maybe some kind of like custodial sentence. I will say I think it will not be long before older Yanni is probably banged up anyway, because I can't see.
Yeah,
he's definitely going to be told you are not allowed to play on any like online servers. You are not allowed to You're not allowed to, and he is not going to be able to not. Like he's going to be back on there and he's going to be locked up.
He has already signed up for an X-Defiant closed beta, and Lord knows what's going to happen next.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I think he can't help himself. I think he cannot help himself.
Well, yeah, like you talk about that, like we're talking about like the headline case here of that one particular swatting incident against Ubisoft Montreal. But yeah, when you look at the other swatting incidents, both major and minor, they're all bad, don't get me wrong, but there's still kind of like a scale, I guess. And then the DDoS attacks, this is someone who clearly like was not capable of drawing a line between what happened in a virtual world ended and what happens in the real world began. And that's a problem. And that's oftentimes a problem unless they get the help they needed, which maybe this is the encouraging part of all of this, as you pointed out, is a problem that doesn't go away too quickly. It's fucked, but I don't know.
Well, let's move on, Jamie, because from one person who couldn't help themselves, let's talk about another one who couldn't help themselves.
Oh dear.
I'm talking about Yuji Naka, co-creator of Sonic the Hedgehog, who has also this week been sentenced for something gaming related. He's been sentenced for insider trading. So quick rundown of this story. You might have recently heard of Yuji Naka for how badly he did with Balan Wonderworld. I always want to call it Wonderland. For Balan Wonderworld. And the fact, like, a bit of a breakdown.
Sorry, Jonesy, that's Binless Wonderworld.
Binless Wonderworld. And the breakdown in relationship that he had with Square Enix while he was making that game. He had a lot of tweets last year when the game came out, and he was sort of complaining about the fact that they'd put out a game that wasn't ready and the developer, da-da-da-da-da. Anyway, we're not going to talk about that because there was something else that he was doing when he was with Square Enix that he shouldn't have been doing, not just making bad games. He was using some of his cheeky insider knowledge, Jamie, about games that were getting developed by other studios, but wasn't public knowledge. And he was using that to buy himself up some tasty little shares in those companies, knowing that, of course, when we went down a little bit further down the line and it was known that those companies were involved with those games, that their stock prices would improve to some degree, and he would be able to reap the tasty financial benefits. And as I said, someone who just couldn't help themselves because he didn't do this once, he did this twice. And the second time he did it, I believe that he had already been arrested for doing it the first time. So I'll give you the quick rundown of what the actual specifics about those two incidences were. So his first arrest was off the back of some shares that he bought in a company called Aiming that was working on an unannounced Dragon Quest mobile game at the time. So it wasn't announced. He bought some shares in it so that when it did come out, they were working on it. Stock price goes up and Yuji makes some tasty money. The second was a similar kind of situation with A-Team, who were developing a Final Fantasy VII The First Soldier game that had not been unveiled at the time. And he did the same thing. And the police did not take that very kindly. That is illegal in Japan.
Yes. And we were reminded once again, although there are obviously differences in the way, certain things are punished between different countries, and France and Japan are not the same place. I will quickly point out very early on that we have jumped from a story about someone calling in a fake hostage situation and risking the lives of tens, if not hundreds of people being sentenced to community service, while a Japanese businessman who has committed insider trading for personal gain is serving real prison time. Potentially. He's got a greater chance of, actually, he doesn't have a better chance of, Yanni still has better chance of actually getting banged up, but
I don't know though. You might be right because Yuji couldn't help himself. He did it again.
He does seem like he can't help himself.
He does. So yeah, as Jamie alluded to, he's been sentenced to 2.5 years in the slammer, but it's suspended for 4 years. So as long as he keeps his hands clean for the next 4 years, he should forego that prison time. I thought I put it in here, but maybe I didn't. I'm trying to see the amount of money he made. I believe it was like $1.2 million.
I can see an article that I'm looking here that was what his fine was, so it's very possible that's the total amount of his fines.
I think
exactly.
Yeah, I think so. I think that would have been the amount that he actually was, or maybe not. Maybe they added some more to the top because they were like, "You passed through the ringer as well."
I can tell you that actually, like, some of the things I'm seeing here that, like, the profits that he made, apparently, according to this one article I'm reading, very low. For example, when Naka was arrested the second time, this is for the investment in developer 18, who were working on Final Fantasy VII: The First Soldier. It's claimed that he bought 130,000 shares and earned a profit of over 20 million yen, which is $146,000 upon their sale. So the article that I've got in front of me from Video Games Chronicle suggests that he's making profit in the realms of a few $100,000, but his fine was 1.2 million.
Which that would actually suggest that they put a punitive amount on there as well, which would make total sense. It wouldn't really make sense if you said, if you get caught doing this stuff, you just have to give the money back, because then, of course, that's not really punitive, right? There's no reason to not try it. If you know at the end of the day, all you're going to have to do is give back the money.
Right, exactly. It's not much of a deterrent. You get a suspended sentence and you have to give back your profits. Oops, yeah. You got me.
Absolutely. Exactly. And then you just try again, wouldn't you? The next year you'd be, oh, you did it again, you cheeky scamp.
Yeah. Give us back those ruddy products, you cheeky bugger. Yes. Well, it's one of those things where, because there's no violent crimes being committed here, and because insider trading, the extent to which it's a victimless crime is up for debate. But it's certainly, I don't know. I just think that there's it's easier to kind of laugh at this in a tragically funny way, because, as you pointed out, Yuji Naka was the co-creator of Sonic, and there's one version of his career where he goes on to be one of the, or at least remembered as one of the most iconic or recognizable game developers of all time, because of the role he played in some of the formative years of this industry, and yet he never really earned that reputation. He never really became like a Miyamoto or anything like that, in spite of how big Sonic became and remains. Then, of course, as you mentioned, there was Balan Wonderworld, which meant that for the last 2 years or so, if you Googled Yuji Naka, the only things that came up were stories about how bad Balan Wonderworld was. And now, if you Google Yuji Naka, the only things that come up are stories about him, committing insider, being found guilty of insider trading, being fined, getting a suspended prison sentence, and all the while, he looks like this cheruby kind of slightly chubby-cheeked Japanese businessman. And I don't know if people are doing this on purpose, but the picture that everyone seems to use when they're talking about all the bad things he's done is just one that I think was from the promotional cycle of Balan Wonderworld, where he's wearing that stupid white top hat. So you've just taken an alternate, a sliding doors, an alternate dimension version of Shigeru Miyamoto, and turned him into one of the laughing stocks of the game industry. And there's something tragic and funny about that.
It is really sad, because when you talk about legacy and how people want to be remembered, it's so easy to just look at sort of the pop crap that comes out toward the end of a career, and you forget how successful and how important and how influential they were, in the past. It's the horrible idea that in future you'll be able to, you'll click on a Wikipedia article and read about Yuji Naka, and there's going to be a top hat wearing freak, he's talking about his insider trading and how he made Balan Wonderworld, which was rubbish.
Yeah.
You'll forget everything else because it's irrelevant.
This is a case of it being the right way round. I'm not suggesting this shouldn't have happened. But what was the name of that musician who was I think Australian born, but was loved by British people, who died a couple of weeks ago? Rolf Harris, who's a musician and kind of because for anyone that doesn't know, Rolf Harris was a very popular household name musician and entertainer, one of those people who was super beloved across the country, met the royal family, all that kind of stuff, who ended up being a nonce, ended up being a paedophile, got convicted and locked up before his death, and then died in jail. And I remember me and some of my friends laughing on the day that he died, because we all live in a world now where you get pop-ups and notifications whenever breaking news happens, and your phone just, a little pop-up comes up, and it'll be Sky News or BBC News, and it's just the headline, and the headline pops up, and all you read is disgraced paedophile Rolf Harris, known for raping underage girls, dies at 75, and you're that is one. I mean, it's absolutely the case. That's absolutely the way it should be. But yes, you're it doesn't matter what your career was, or nothing else matters when you're a paedophile.
No, go on.
That's the conclusion. That's the moral of that story. Nothing else matters. It doesn't matter what you create or what you did. When you're a paedophile, that's what people remember. And unfortunately, rightly so, you dirty nonce. You shouldn't have done it.
I didn't want to get into.
Oh
No, I was going to say there is a question of how big do you have to be remembered for more than being a paedophile, and I was like, do I want to go down this route? Maybe not.
well, like
Not. I don't know if I can't remember what he's been found guilty of or charged with, whatever. But I was going to say they answered that question. You're right. It's Michael Jackson. It's how big do you have to be?
Well, yeah, but then Michael Jackson was one of those cases where, like, because he was never found guilty of anything, when Michael Jackson dies, you know, most outlets don't write like accused paedophile Michael Jackson or like not guilty child molester Michael Jackson dies at whatever.
But we've gone to a weird place. So let's move on from. Yuji Naka, by the way, has not been found guilty of doing.
Oh, I found the exact headline. This was what popped up on my phone. So Sky News: Rolf Harris, convicted paedophile who used his fame to groom young girls, dies age 93. And I was like, yeah, that is one way to make sure that
that's how you'll be.
The headlines that come out around your death, exactly how you're remembered, changed irreversibly through your deeds and your acts, you dirty, dirty nonce.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on from one legacy, not so good.
Rolf's.
No, Yuji Naka, not so good legacy at this point, to something which could have an amazing legacy for years to come, because we have had some leaks this week about The Last of Us Part 3, Jamie.
Yes.
A game which I think everyone would probably say, of course, they are making a third one. Why would they not? It is massively successful. There's now a TV show, blah, 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 blah. But two internet tipsters who are used to giving us scoops on Marvel TV shows, movies, have been giving us the scoopy scoops around Last of Us Part 3. There's not been a massive amount released, but one of the reasons we want to talk about this is because effectively this is like confirmation that they are actively making The Last of Us Part 3, which I think will make a lot of people happy. Naughty Dog itself haven't sort of come out and said anything about Part 3. They've not given us any indication of anything. They're not touching anything, but we do have some tidbits to mention from the leakers. So leaker one is Daniel RPK, who has said that the game, Part 3, will include 5 new characters that we know about at this point, are Lucas, Mason, Val, Ezra, and Gracie, who will reportedly be playing a group of scavengers who are living on the outskirts of a post-apocalyptic city. And I think, Jamie, you made the interesting point, which was, given the fact we've got a base of operations for them in an old Victorian house, does that mean that they are effectively a faction?
Yeah. Well, because, or just not Last of Us Part 3 related at all. Because still to this day, like, no one really knows what's going on with that Last of Us multiplayer project, other than the fact that they confirmed it had been delayed and, you know, Bungie came in and now they're reworking it with a probably, from what we believe, a smaller team. When I hear about, it doesn't help that they're named and like the leakers make a lot of references to kind of like filming beginning. It's hard to imagine sort of like narrative cutscenes having a big role within that multiplayer project. But there is still something about this where it's like, oh, a group of survivors, a base of operations. They're like, could these be elements or components of an expanded multiplayer standalone project and not The Last of Us Part 3 as such? Because as you pointed out, the interesting thing about this is that if this is The Last of Us Part 3, then it doesn't mean the game's out soon, not by a long shot,
No.
but it means they're further ahead than people thought they were or thought they would be.
Yeah, so because I think we talked about before the show that when a game like The Last of Us Part 2 comes out and it's like week 1 is done and the Metacritic is like 98, and the sales figures are already looking insane, you've got to know that there's going to be a Part 3. At that point, like, surely they know, oh, we're making another one. Like, there's no way Sony are going to go, nah, we'll just call it there.
Well, not just Sony now, because then you've also got to factor in like other things like the HBO and Sky angle, where like they have just adapted the first season of that, like as the first game of that series into a TV show, which was an absolute Goliath and a record breaker on so many different levels. They want as much source material as possible, and if they can get to the point where, in any way, shape, or form, a game and a season of television are timed to release, even in the same ballpark, the same window, then that's mutually beneficial all around. Like that's the dream for both. Both sides of that industry.
No, absolutely. That what I can't remember the word is, like the co-option between those two different formats. Yeah, because it's just going to push each one, right? It's free advertising.
Yeah, exactly.
There was another bit of interesting information that came from a leaker called Viewer Anon, who stated, and this is interesting to me for a couple of reasons, who stated that Ellie will be at least as important in Part 3 as she was in The Last of Us Part 2, which is kind of interesting because if you think of it in the sense of, okay, well, Ellie's the main character now. Like, she is the main character. So, of course, she's going to be that, like, we would assume so. But then, of course, you have to remember that she wasn't actually the only main character in The Last of Us Part 2. And does this mean that she is... They're not saying she's the only main character. So are we going to see some shenanigans?
Also, we've had two games, two main characters. Why should Ellie still be the protagonist? Like, a lot of people...
Imagine if she wasn't. Imagine if she's not.
I absolutely could see a world in which she isn't. What left... Well, other than her chasing after the parts of her life that left her behind when she went on her mission, for want of a better way of putting it, like, what else is there to... Like,
I think you need a new impetus for her journey. Like, you need.
I think at some point like a realistic, believable character has had enough impetuses for one lifetime and needs to just put down the gun. I don't know. Like, I'm very happy with, as a fan of The Last of Us Part 2, I was very happy with exactly where they left Ellie. And whilst, you know, there is some ambiguity about where she was going to go next and what she was going to do, I don't think any of that ambiguity necessarily lends itself to an entire another game.
I see, but when I said I read that quote with interest was because my brain then went to, originally I thought, like, yeah, Ellie's going to be the main character, but then my brain went to, oh no, that's maybe a weird way of saying that Ellie is going to be part of the main story, as important as she was in Part 2, but actually, you may well be playing as another character for half the game. You may well be playing as these scavengers. You know, there may be even more characters that get to play as.
Could be anything.
As you've said, I don't think she can now. We can't. Playing a whole game as Ellie now, I think, might be too much.
I agree. She's been through the ringer, man. Like, we need to just leave poor Ellie alone. Leave Abby alone as well while we're at it. Just leave everyone alone from Last of Us Part 2. They've suffered enough and lost enough fingers.
I'm glad you bring up Abby because at this point there has been no word on whether Abby or Lev will be returning to Part 3. We don't know at all. But no, I'm kind of with you. I kind of think maybe you're right. Leave Abby, leave Lev. Like Ellie could be, definitely needs to be an important part of this game for me, but absolutely she could not be the main character. But she could be like she could be a third. She could be an important elder figure to. If we've moved on like a decent chunk of time, for example.
Yeah. And like, and my interpretation of the ending of The Last of Us Part 2 is that while it remained to be seen whether or not she went to actively pursue them, I still fully believe that there are parts of Ellie's life that she still actively cares enough for that she would fight for should she have to. I don't want to see her have to do that again because, like I said, at a certain point, the character's been through enough and has been tested enough, and you almost don't need to see them run through the ringer again. But if push came to shove, like, she's still a character that like I said, I believe has things to fight for. I just wonder, like, how liberating it could be for the entire team at Naughty Dog to start expanding on their view of The Last of Us as and while of course you have to find personal and individual stories within it, start looking at it as a wider world or as a universe and saying, like, we could really go, well, I was about to say we could really go anywhere and you could go to any part of the world at any time, and as long as it's about, like, the effects of, like, you know, this widespread infection and this post-apocalyptic landscape on the people that have remained behind, then it's still inherently a Last of Us project. But it would be a little bit strange if it was completely removed from the lineage of the Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2 because they were a direct sequel to one another. So if they called something The Last of Us Part 3 and, like, it was a complete...
Has to be more of the story, right?
Kind of.
Yeah.
But
that's what I'm saying. I feel like Ellie could be available, and I'm even saying I feel like Ellie should be available to be a big part in that story, but she shouldn't be the main part of that story. So she could absolutely be, being the one holding things together. She could be the one back at the base who's like she's now progressed into being, almost like a matriarchal figure, trying to hold together a group of survivors. and then you can maybe play as the younger characters who are still trying to find their place in the world. And actually, we've got some interesting quotes from, information from Neil Druckmann back in 2021. Neil Druckmann said that The Last of Us Part 3 had been penned, and he did hope that one day it could see the light of day, as that was all back in 21. And actually, earlier this year, we talked about on the podcast, Druckmann had reiterated that Naughty Dog would be open to developing a Part 3, but only if the team could come up with a compelling story that has the universal message and statement about love that they were trying to get across with the first two parts. So
here's an interesting question, because you look at those quotes side by side, claiming to have a story outline in 2021 and then claiming in 2 years later to be open to return to that project if you can come up with a compelling story. Does that suggest that the 2021 story got shot down?
I would be surprised if it, because it was just an outline apparently. I'd be surprised if it didn't get shot down based on where that universe is. With, as you said, you've now got the issue of you've got HBO on board. You've got maybe a new audience have come on board with the TV side, and we don't know what's happening with the multiplayer project and all that sort of stuff. So do they have to rethink where they're going with a third installment? Because they need to almost keep it going.
Yeah. Or they could do they could pull a Red Dead and make The Last of Us 3, but it's actually a prequel that adds more context to the things that we have now seen and we already know.
In that, they bring Joel back.
I'm not going to say anything in either in favor or against it, but categorically what I will say is that a Last of Us Part 3 starring a young Joel would be one of the most popular moves I think that Naughty Dog could ever make in terms of public opinion, because people were very, and still are very, salty about some plot points that took place in The Last of Us Part 2. And I think there is absolutely still territory to explore about it's such Joel in the intervening years.
I was going to say it's such fertile ground in that sort of however long that's supposed to be, 10, 20 years from when the death of Sarah all the way through to meeting him in the zone with God, what was her name? I can't remember.
Tess.
Thank you. There's so much there that you could explore, and as you said, bringing Joel back would be amazingly popular. It's weird though, because I don't know where I'm at. I don't know where I'm. All right, everyone listens to this who's on YouTube, or even if you're not, if you're on podcast, head over to the YouTube platform and give us your opinion. I'm torn. Do I want to see, and I don't know if I want to see a Part 3 that sort of shuts the door on Ellie and gives them a lovely peachy end of the world, they found the place where the cordyceps is non-existent, or they make a cure, or the opposite, the world burns, everyone dies. I don't know if I want to finish the story Part 3, or if I want something a little bit disjointed so they can just carry on in the world forever. I'm so torn.
I the more I think about it, the less I want to continue the story Part 3. And the more I think about the Red Dead Redemption 2, the more I'm like, because when you think about Red Dead Redemption 2, it shouldn't have worked, because it took a game that was a pretty open and shut case. It made a prequel to that game. It hinged its prequel around a character that was completely new and inserted into that story, in spite of the fact that no one in the original game ever mentions them because they didn't exist yet canonically.
Yep.
And that character is then has a close relationship and or friendship with the protagonist of the original Red Dead Redemption in John Marston, and everything completely worked. And it doesn't matter that future John Marston or future Dutch never talk about Arthur Morgan. It doesn't matter that you go into Red Dead Redemption 2 knowing, hey, there's probably going to be a reason why Arthur Morgan isn't in, they can't retroactively add this character into the happenings of the first game. And yet everything it does to add additional context to John Marston's arc and how meaningful his, the deeds he has to do in Red Dead Redemption 1 are, to the places that people like Dutch and Javier and Bill are in Red Dead Redemption 1, everything it's super, super well done, while in its own right crafting a story around Arthur Morgan that is unbelievably engaging and touching and everything you'd want it to be. And that I have every faith in the team at Naughty Dog to successfully tackle whatever they want. And I know that's probably a tough tough ask, like to do something, to do an equivalent like that for The Last of Us Part 3 or whatever they want to call it. But that'd be very interesting. Like if you could create a new character who ends up being a seamless insert in a prequel who interacts with Joel in a way that like adds to or embellishes Joel's character going forward. So you can almost replay 1 and 2 with a different perspective on that character. Like that's just a very interesting prospect.
That I would love that so much. Like, and especially if, like you said, if it has that thing of, then it makes you almost, if they could write it so well that it also almost retroactively makes you go, that's why and it's that kind of feel.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. Like they've absolutely done it in the past. I think, and it's not to the same level as that, but like I thought that about Rogue One. Like I thought they did such a good job.
But yeah, great shout. Like
and it's kind of like how this always had to have existed. Of course it did, and you just didn't know the story. Opposite really to like the writing of something like Black Adam, unfortunately. But no, I'm going to stop that now. But no, yeah, you've got me now. I want a prequel that gives more flavor to Joel.
Yeah.
And his
like
ongoing relationships.
Even if there's like a throwaway story, like Joel, I don't know, let's say Joel says something randomly at the beginning of part 1 to Tess, where he's like, "Don't you remember that time back in Boston or whatever?" And like and part 3 is about that time back in Boston and these characters that are hinted at but never mentioned by name, and now we're seeing those stories fleshed out. And like, yeah, like I said, when I think about what Red Dead Redemption 2 managed to do for John Marston while still being a game about Arthur Morgan, like very deftly judged and juggled, and like even little things that you just never thought about, but like actually, yeah, you will see how John Marston got those weird scars on his face, and you will see what his relationship with Abigail is like, or you will see what Jack's upbringing was like. You will see how they built their house that they live in the first game. Like all these little touches that are completely not unnecessary, but like almost could be trivial, but it's just character building to. It's also some of the best.
It's also such an interesting idea because and with this is often the case with like, you know, post-apocalyptic zombie world kind of stuff, is that you have like the zombies when they become zombies, that initial kind of like everyone's turning into zombies, and then you have the sort of drudgery of living in these zones where you're sort of marshaled by a pop-up army or whatever they're called in The Last of Us. But you then have this ground in the middle where you could have had all hell is breaking loose. Most people aren't yet turned into zombies. There are humans just still trying to live in a world that doesn't exist anymore. You've also got people trying to take advantage of the fact that the world as we know it is dying. And if you could play Joel in that section of that game, so we're not where it's kind of as crazy as The Last of Us Part 1 is, where, you know, you have the initial outbreak and all of that, but it's kind of the days after that, and then maybe like a few years after, where it's everything's settling into the new world. So you get the rise of the military factions, you get the rise of how do we live? How do we actually get on with this, what's going on?
Yeah.
Oh, that's yeah.
It would be very cool. The only reservation that I would have that I just sort of like considered as you would say,
the Fireflies.
You would have a lot of really interesting things. The only thing that I thought of just then as you were saying that would be a bit of a bummer is it would be very hard to do through all the things that you could touch upon through a game like that. It'd be very hard to touch upon anything that builds into Joel's relationship with Ellie. And that's such a defining part of the games that would be to come.
Yeah.
Because we've already seen so much of that relationship almost in real time, right? Like, and the parts we haven't seen largely exist in the gap between where The Last of Us Part 1 and The Last of Us Part 2 were set. And so it would be that is the one thing that I would think would be a downside. But it wouldn't be a game breaker.
No, not at all. Well, blimey. Yeah, let us know what you think in the comments down below. If you, what you think they'll do, if you think there'll be a part 3 with, mainly Ellie, if you think they'll go to a prequel. Joe, if you think they should do prequels instead of doing another post-quel sequel.
Yeah.
But with that, Jamie, I think given that there weren't many stories today and they were pretty low on the ground, I think we've done quite well. Like I said, if you want to check out some more Nick Cage stuff, head over to a platform of your choice and enjoy it, because there's many other compilations out there. And if you're a Nick Cage fan like we are, you'll be doing yourself a favour. All that's left for me to do is to say, if you want to check us out, as I said, we are YouTube and Twitter at SuperShow Pod. We're available on podcasting platforms as well. And we will be back again the same time next week, hopefully for a live show. But if we're not, we will let you know if it's going to be pre-recorded. Thanks so much, Jamie. Thank you for your wisdom, as always, and your insights. Much appreciated.
Thank you for being such a wonderful and generous host, as always, Jonesy. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, mate. Yeah, we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.